welcome the host for the segment, Minaka Doshi, Senior Editor, Bloomberg. You can give her a big round of applause as she joins us on stage. Bloomberg, India's leading multimedia business platform, has established itself as an independent newsroom with authoritative coverage on economy, financial markets, business, and policy. Prior to joining Bloomberg, Minaka worked at CNBC TV 18 as an executive editor, and in over 20 years at CNBC TV 18, she reported on companies, M&A, policy, law and tax, hosted several flagship news shows, and was host and editor of the firm, India's first television show on law, tax, and audit. A big welcome to Minaka. Thank you so much for joining us and hosting the session. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to please welcome our guest for this session, Nandini Piramal, Non-Executive Director, Piramal Enterprises Limited, and Chairperson, Piramal Pharma Limited. A big round of applause, please, for Nandini. She's responsible for setting strategy and driving results at Piramal Pharma. Piramal Pharma offers a portfolio of differentiated products and services through its 17 global development and manufacturing facilities and a global distribution network in over 100 countries. Ms. Piramal is also an advisor to the Piramal Foundation, which has impacted the lives of over 113 million Indians in areas ranging from gender, public health, to education and purified water. She's a visionary business leader driven by her commitment to bettering society. Her efforts in the business and social world led to her being recognized as the most amongst India's most powerful women by Business Today in 2020, 2022, and 2023 for her outstanding contribution in business and social growth. She was also awarded a Young Global Leader in 2014 by the World Economic Forum, and she holds a BA Honours in Politics, Philosophy, and Economics from Oxford University, and also an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business. Welcome, Ms. Piramal. Ma'am, I'm handing it over to you.
We'll stay with you in terms of comments, though the previous one was a tough act to follow, but nonetheless, I was hopeful that in this conversation, we'd get to know a little bit more about Nandini Piramal, not just a woman business leader, but a business leader who happens to be a woman, and therefore her decision-making, her responses today are nuanced by that, but not determined by that necessarily. At least that's how my generation came to learn of how to approach this and how to navigate this issue of a gender gap. So I don't have any women questions, Nandini, but I do want to start by getting to know you a little better and giving the audience the opportunity to do so as well. So how did you get here? You are the daughter of two famous entrepreneurs, if I may call it that. Did you always want to work in the family business? Did you always want to do pharmaceuticals? Or did pharmaceuticals pick you?
I would say I did work as a consultant for a couple of years after I did undergrad. But I think for me, the opportunity to the family business is that you could just do much more at a younger age. So I was a fool not to take that. So I think that's kind of how it started. But I never stopped working because I actually don't know what I would do with myself. If I wake up in a weekday and I'm like, okay, I have a day off, what do I do? So that's kind of how. But I started out in pharma, worked out in operational excellence in the UK and the US, came back to India, did supply chain, HR, more operational excellence, and quality, and then kind of did a whole variety of roles. And I think that's, again, nice. The nice thing is just moving around, you get to see a lot. Then about 5 years ago, started leading the pharma business. We subsidized it, raised money from Carlyle as an investor, went public, had I'd say a rocky road for the last 2 years, and now we're sort of coming out of and turnaround. So that's kind of the career in a nutshell. But the other thing is we also sold our business initially in 2010 for, we sold 95% of profit and 65% of revenue and kind of had to reinvent ourselves. So again, the idea is we've done a whole bunch of variety of things and keep reinventing what I'm doing.
I'm glad you brought that up because in 2010, when your father sold the business, it was amongst the largest pharmaceutical deals that were done in this country. I think almost $4 billion, if I remember correctly. And I'm curious, at that point in time, did you even consider that you had the choice to do something of your own entirely? Or did you feel, no, there's now an opportunity to rebuild something and refashion something?
I think there was the idea, this is the opportunity to rebuild and refashion what we were doing, because we actually took the money in the company, so we didn't take the money kind of personally. We didn't sell shares and exit. We took the money in the company and said, look, we're going to rebuild and decide and figure out what we want to do next.
So it was a natural consequence for you, not a choice that you had to
I think
consciously
there was
make.
a choice, is do we want to sell shares or do we want to take the money as an asset sale? And we chose to take the money as an asset sale.
Sure, that was a family decision.
Yeah.
A personal decision of staying within the family business or maybe opting out.
As I said, I really don't know what I would do with myself if I didn't work and if I didn't have the structure of work. So I think it was kind of natural.
Okay, great. One of the things that often the trope that surrounds family businesses, if I may put it that way, is that by the second or third generation, in some sense, both the purpose and the focus starts to get diluted, and the value creation also therefore gets diluted. How do you respond to that?
Turn up to work and do my best every day. I'm actually serious. I think it's, as long as you put in your best efforts and you work at it, the results will come.
Okay.
It's actually as simple as that. Is that if you put your best in, results will show up.
So you don't agree that there is a possibility of value dilution as subsequent generations go by?
You asked me how I dealt with it.
Turn up at work and...
Right. I think I'd say different families have different ways of, raising their kids, and we'll see.
Okay. Your brother's also in the family business?
Yeah.
He thinks the same way, I imagine?
Pretty much. He turns up every day and has work to do.
Okay. Did you picked pharma over financial services?
I think it's sort of, as we kind of were working together, we realized that we're probably best suited to one or the other, is how I would put it.
Okay, great. So how do you describe your contribution to the pharmaceutical business over the course of the last decade at least? Because since then you've had the chance to fashion this in your own eyes. And I say this because it's been an interesting decade for the Indian pharmaceutical industry, right? We are amongst the largest generic makers in the world. We've been able to, how do I put it, refashion drugs at very, very cheap prices. But we've also come to develop, unfortunately, in one part of the industry, a reputation for being poor quality manufacturers, whether it was the Ranbaxy situation or more recently, deadly cough syrups. So in the context of what this industry has gone through in the last 10 years, how do you view your role and your contribution?
I would say we took a differentiated road than most. And the business model that we chose is not what other pharma companies chose to do. And when we sold our business in 2010, we actually had a non-compete, so we couldn't do branded generics. And so what we had, which was at that point, is we had a contract manufacturing business, we had a hospital generic business that sold hospitals all around the world, and we had a small over-the-counter drugs business. We also had a new chemical entities business. We had an imaging business. We had kind of a knee device, sorry, so for knee joints, a device. So we had a whole bunch of these small little businesses. So we actually sold or shut down or kind of businesses that we want the natural owners for. So like we had part of what is now SRL Diagnostics was part of our business. So we actually sold a bunch, closed a bunch, and kind of refocused the portfolio on things that we thought we had some cards to play, we had a differentiator, and we could be relevant in the world, right? We think, so right now the way our business is, it's about, what, 80% dollar revenue, the rest of it's India. We emphasized on quality, so, since, quality has been reporting to me, actually always, but we've not had a single kind of OAI, which is an official action indicated, which is kind of a precursor to a warning letter by the FDA. And if we just talk about quality, we've kind of had 33 FDA audits in the last 10 years, and we've kind of passed all of them. But even on a yearly basis, across our sites, we have 170 audits between customers and regulators. So you have a lot of people walking through.
Sure. It still go back to the question I asked you before this. You fashioned it in pulling out the businesses that you didn't, thought fit, and you kept the ones that thought fit. How did you grow that to the scale you have now?
We grew through both organic and acquisition, so it's both. We're one of the few, I'd say, Indian players that actually have significant manufacturing presence outside the country. So we have 5 plants in North America, 2 in the UK. And I think because of, in a way, I'd say, how we manage, we're actually much more cross-border than others. And I think that's kind of who we are.
And the regulatory sort of allusion that you made was largely to counter, I think, the otherwise general narrative around poor quality manufacturing, right? Yeah. What do you make of the opportunity that lies ahead? I know you said that about, 80% of your business was dollar revenue, but the local market is also a fast and rapidly growing one. You have an OTC presence in this market. Over time, do you see the composition of your business, or at least the shares of the different divisions change?
They have changed. The OTC is the smallest, and it's been growing the fastest, so the shares might change a bit. But we have to also remember that 50% of the world's pharma market is the US. So that's, in a way, the biggest market which pays the highest price for drugs. And so it's always going to be a large share of what we do.
So consciously, you don't intend to change at least this composition of business over the course of the next 5 to 10 years?
So we don't want to go back into branded generics. In a way, we don't want to relive the past.
Okay. One of the things that India has always lacked as a story to tell in the pharmaceutical industry is that of being a creator of innovative drugs, right? I'm not suggesting that your company is going to set out to do that, but since you've had such a great view of the industry over the course of the last 2 decades, do you think within India we have that ability?
I think some of the other pharmaceutical companies are spending very large amounts of money to try and discover new drugs. I pray to God that they will succeed.
So you do believe that we could get there?
I think
because
we'll
this is a narrative I've been hearing for almost 20 years of covering pharmaceuticals.
I think now the amount of money that they're spending is significant. They are being relatively smart about it. Some of them are actually just opening labs in California and sponsoring research there. So that's another way of looking at it. So, there'll still be an Indian company behind it.
Okay. In this journey, what did you think, Nandini, was your most important contribution to the business? Was it strategy? Was it, a keen eye to detail when it comes to operational excellence? Because I heard you say that repeatedly in your responses. Or was it something else that you thought was your strength that you brought to the table and was unique?
I think building a culture of consensus, building a culture that you can actually have different parts of the world working together as a team. So we've got distributed teams. You'll quite often have one person in India and 3 people in the US or the other way around, right? They have to learn how to talk to each other. One of my first roles when I started in the company, I was quite young, we'd done an acquisition in Pennsylvania. And I'm sitting there listening to the 2 teams, in effect, meet. And they're all talking the same language, but nobody's understanding what the other person's saying, right? So how do you actually bring them together, and how do you actually align people and kind of point them in the same direction? I think is one of those things that I can do, or I have done.
Was it challenging to do that, being
It
the
is,
woman on the
because-
table?
Huh?
Was it challenging to do that, being the
Of course.
woman on the
I
table?
mean, I was the young, forget even just being the woman, I was the youngest person on the table, right? And I'm just sitting there listening to them and saying, then just had to stop people and say, this is what I'm hearing you say. Is that what you heard? And they're like, oh, okay. So it's just bringing people together.
And has ownership been an advantage or a disadvantage through this cause?
I mean, it has been an advantage, right? Because I could then go off and do multiple roles across the spectrum, and people, again, are quite willing to teach you. But they are also very, very willing to discount you, right? I've had enough people say, look, what she's saying is not right. And then you have to kind of go back, get the facts, and say, this is why I'm damn right.
Not because I own this company or my family owns the company. Yeah. So, again, I'm curious. I would love if you could give us illustrations of what you have thought have been the biggest leadership challenges in all of this time, right?
Some of the biggest leadership, you know that, I think it sort of comes to when it got ethics to some extent, when you know that someone's saying something that, I don't know, acting two-faced in a way, it's saying, they're saying something to you and they're saying something to someone else, and how do you prove that? When they're more senior, more respected than you.
And how did you navigate it?
You actually found 5 people to actually then support you and say, right, saying this is what's being said.
When you say ethics, you mean broadly
No,
ethics,
but just
or
like,
you mean manufacturing ethics?
No, it's more saying, in one meeting to you saying, this is what's going to happen, and then in another meeting saying, no, this is something else.
Okay.
Right? So being basically double speaking. Right?
And you would list that as maybe amongst the sort of
it's when
the
it's
biggest
someone
hurdles you've had to encounter?
Someone who's quite respected, they're older than you in position, they're, above you in the hierarchy, and then you're here and you're like, what you're saying is wrong. How do I actually then tell the other people who are all senior, who are all wanting to listen to this person because they're senior, and you're much younger, and you're like, no, that's not right. So it's a bit like being, not a whistleblower, but it's saying is if you're young and you're saying, this is wrong, how do you actually convince other older people that what you're saying is right?
It's interesting
it's
you say
credibility.
this. From the outside, someone would think that's a lucky life to have, born into, a family of business leaders. And I'll come back to that. But interestingly, in your family, both your mother and your father played an equal role almost in building out that business, right? So from the outside, it looks privileged. From the inside, you've had to deal with three layers of bias, you might say.
No, you're
young,
you're a
women,
woman,
and ownership.
Yeah, and so it is. How do you actually win that credibility to say, this is why I'm saying something? So
Was there never a temptation to give this up and say, maybe I'll just go do something of my own that will help, sort of prove who I am or what my worth is?
I like building things, right? I actually like building institutions, so that's kind of what excites me.
You could have done it on your own.
I know, but then I was just in the weeds.
Okay, was never tempted to do that at all.
No.
Okay, so where do you hope to take this from here on? I mean, you've pointed out what you think the future of pharmaceuticals can be in India. What's your 10-year vision?
10-year vision? I think we're in an industry that's rapidly consolidating and just growing bigger. So I'll just give you one example. We haven't quite touched $1 billion in revenue, and that should happen hopefully soon. But one of our competitors did an acquisition that was for one plant that was $1 billion just last week. So I was like, it'd be nice to get to that level.
So size is one thing?
No, size, but I'm just saying it's that ability to make those kind of investments, I think, is something that would be quite cool to be done.
And how would you enable those? Are you looking at doing this mostly organically? Or?
So I think right now, which I keep telling my team, is organic growth, debt reduction, and operational improvement. 3 priorities.
Why not as much of an M&A focus? Your father had one.
We'll reduce debt, and then we'll talk about M&A.
You're on your way to doing that. You just did a rights issue to do that.
But we'll still do some more, and then we'll see.
So is it just debt that is probably holding you back from
doing? No, I mean, we've actually invested. We've done a fair amount of brownfield investment, and we do actually need the brownfield investment to start giving us back the paybacks that we'd invested, right?
Okay.
So that's the other.
The reason why I was asking this is, I was reading this UBS study on inheritors of family businesses, and I'm sorry, I know you probably dislike that description to some extent, but I'm just using it to showcase one important part of that study, in which, and I actually brought a quote because I wanted to quote it back to you and see if you would agree with that or not. But they found that the risk appetite in the first generation when it comes to the business or the enterprise they're building is considerably high, but they tend to save the money that they make in low-risk instruments. When it comes to subsequent generations, the risk appetite for the business is relatively low, and an increasing number of inheritors are choosing to step away from the family business. But when it comes to investing the money, most of them prefer to do so through private equity, which is a higher risk appetite. Now, you might say this is formulaic or this is generalization. I don't subscribe to it. I'm my own person. But they quoted a billionaire as saying this about the next generation. The main problem with the younger generation is to educate them to be ambitious. They take ambitions for granted. They take important entrepreneurial information for granted, whereas the founding generation has to collect this for themselves and make the best out of it. Would you agree?
So actually, until 2020, we did 5 acquisitions in like 4 years.
Okay, M&A is not the only method.
So I'm just saying and then we had COVID, which and now we're trying to say, okay, when we did those acquisitions, we actually made a case for scale for each of those acquisitions because we bought capabilities and we bought kind of small mom and pop companies that didn't have the ability to scale and didn't have the quality, the IT, and the other infrastructure that they needed to scale. So for us, we've actually done a whole bunch of brownfield investments to add into each of these to grow them. And that's, in a way, maybe we just did our biggest investment with 45 million pounds in a facility in Grangemouth, which we opened in January. To actually fill that is a whole new challenge as well.
So why don't you describe in your words your own risk appetite?
My own. So I'll tell you that for my personal money, it's actually all in mutual funds.
Okay.
So.
Not private equity.
So not private equity. I will say that I find the fees of private equity too high. So I'm like, I can get more. I'm actually serious. It's like you get more return over a better, longer period than in an ETF than in a private equity, but that's just maybe my. So this is when the Marwadi in me comes out when I'm like, there are too high fees. We're just too ridiculous for us because, again, the Marwadi in me is like, I need to see free cash flow, right? I can't look at this like, I don't know, the e-commerce companies has like, GMV concept. I was like, nope, can't do it. I'm like, give me free cash flow and then we can talk. So it's a bit old school, I would say, when it comes to.
You're defying all the generalizations I've put out there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, lovely to hear. What would you say to young women entrepreneurs in this room, on both sides of the deal, in fact, there are enough financiers here as well, of what you've learned of your entrepreneurial journey so far?
Tenacity and longevity have value. So at times in your life, you will be like, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I waking up and going to work? So I think if you can figure out a way to stick it out, to figure out a way to say, okay, I'm going to need to go, I don't know, part-time for something or take a sabbatical, I'd say don't give up. I think I've seen too many people in tough times say, look, I'm going to take a break, and then they never come back to work. So that would be mine.
You weren't tempted when you had children?
No, I will say that, I don't know, I had my first and I was like 2 months in, I'm like, okay, I need to go to work because I can't stay at home without tearing my head out, so that's just partly me.
You know, one of the first things you said in the prep call we were having before this was, I have no mom guilt.
I have none. I have none. I'm like, I actually don't. And as someone said, like, look, you have a great support system, build it, beg them, pay them, actually as much as, like, whatever you can, right? I think this is my mom said to me, she's like, look, if you have help, overpay them. The value of your time is much more valuable than their time, so just overpay them. And they won't leave you, and you'll actually be happy. So I have actually no mom. So like I'll say this, like next week, both of us, my husband and I do work together, and we're gonna miss our daughter's PTA meeting because we're leading a board offsite. And it's like, sorry, we're just not there.
You brought up that your husband and you work together. I think this is interesting. Like I said, right? Your father, Ajay Piramal, and your mother, Dr. Swati Piramal, worked together and built the business side by side. It was rare. I can tell you that at the time I was covering especially family-owned business houses in this country, and it was very rare to see the woman with an equal seat on the table right there, right? And now you and your husband are doing almost the same, but in slightly reversed roles. How easy or difficult is it? Actually, let me rewind. How did it come to be that? Because you both come from consulting backgrounds, don't you?
We met at business school. He actually worked for a consultancy and a private equity in India. So we decided, when we got married, we decided, let's try India for a year. So we came here in 2009, so 15 years later, we're still here. And he actually worked at Blackstone for a while, McKinsey and Blackstone. And you know, at one point we said, look, does Blackstone make sense for you? It may not have, it didn't from a career point of view. So we said, well, why don't you come over and work in the family business, and we'll see. So that's kind of how it happened. I think that was 13 years ago.
And how's it been?
So for a long time, we actually didn't talk to each other every day in terms of work, but now we do. It generally works, except for the fact that on like Sunday mornings, I'm like, I'm not talking to you about business. So I try and draw boundaries.
And you're able to?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I think that's as much as I'm going to get out of Nandini this evening in terms of, you know, what or how interesting life has been over the last 20 years or so, and what she hopes to do over the course of the next 10. We'd like to open it up to questions in the audience. If any of you have any thoughts or questions you would like her to answer, please put your hand up.
Talking about the success and failures. So as a solo female founder, you know, I live and die by whatever I do. Do you find that for you, that it's exponential, the responsibility from the conversation we just had?
Yeah, because I mean, I raised money and I have to make sure that my investors get a good exit. So similar, yes.
Nandini, I was very intrigued when you said you don't feel any mom guilt, right? And I mean, hats off. I think that's really deserves an applause because, but I'm just curious, like, has that always been the case? Have you been able to develop a thicker skin over time? Like, yeah.
See, the thing is, the difference maybe I'll say is my mom always worked. Right? So I never really came home to a mom waiting for me with, you know, nice snacks and says, how was your day, beta? Because she was at work. So I think that's maybe the difference. Like, I kind of got used to it. The other thing I will say is right now my kids don't want to talk to me until 7 p.m. Because they're busy. So I think that also helps.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I think the other thing is it's really important to show your kids that your career and what you do also is as important as their dad's, right? Because if you're always the one that shows up to whatever PTA meeting or, I don't know, dance class or tennis class, and you're basically saying that your career is not as important as dad's. So I think kids watch what you do, not what you say. You can say women are equal, but if in the home your career is not being as important or as many accommodations are being made for your career, then what do you do?
At the right price, okay, let me provide some context to this. Given that you've spent 20 years of blood and sweat in building out this new version of Piramal Pharma, and so of course you inherited some part of it from your family, but it's as much your own now. At the right price, would you be able to exit fully?
At this point, no.
Why?
I love what I do, right? And that's just fun. It gives you purpose, it gives you structure. So, you know what? I've got lots to do. Maybe, I don't know, you want to build a company that your kids can eventually run. So at this point, I'm being like, you know, first-gen Marwadi founder saying no.
You wouldn't want to sell?
No.
That's interesting. You know, I must say this as a wrap-up. I was telling Nandini, whilst we were waiting for the room to fill in, that it's an interesting experience for me because as a younger journalist, I've had the opportunity to interview both her father and her mother, and now to be able to speak with her and see the differences generationally, see the different ambitions and the ways to express it. And I must say that she's defied every generalization I've put to her in this conversation. She's also not a woman of too many words, so it's been challenging to get more out of her. But maybe we'll come back next year and you know, we'll be able to share a little bit of how far we reached in being able to do that. So thank you for your time, Nandini, and thank you everyone for bearing with us. This was your last session, so thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Piramal and Ms. Doshi, for that intriguing conversation. I would like to invite Anita George, Global Sustainable Investment Professional, to please join us on stage and present the token of appreciation on behalf of WINPI. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, once again, the products are made by women entrepreneurs, and WINPI is honored to be able to provide this platform for them to showcase their products. Ms. Piramal, thank you so much for your fantastic insights, and Ms. Doshi, thank you. We'd like to get a photograph, please. Ladies and gentlemen, you can put your hands together one more time. I think that was a very, very interesting conversation.